Right, welcome everybody. I'm Hitan Shah from the Royal Statistical Society and I'm your compere for the evening. The Royal Statistical Society has been interested in matters concerned with data and data in the public interest for hundreds of years now, and we're delighted at the recent developments in this area. So tonight we're here to talk about the big data opportunity, which could be the big opportunity arising from data or the big data opportunity, and we'll find out more about whether it's one or the other or both. And the context is that this government has taken what can be seen as perhaps a relatively dry and technical agenda around open data and really driven it forward, and I think it must be commended for that. We can't always know how the data will be used, but it will, we think, lead to innovation, to better public service delivery, to opening up democracy, and perhaps even to greater economic growth. But the path to this may not always be straightforward. There are issues clearly around privacy and confidentiality, data handling capacity in the civil service, and all the classic data quality issues that statisticians have to think about all the time. So there is a garbage in, garbage out principle, even with very big data sets. So we've got three excellent speakers tonight. Not yet with us, but soon to be arriving will be Francis Maude, Minister for the Cabinet Office and MP for Horsham. He is a co-founder of Policy Exchange and is the man who has really driven the transparency and openness agenda in this government, which has culminated in the white paper which was launched last week around open data. We have James Petter from EMC. He's Vice President and Country Manager for UK and Ireland. And EMC is a large IT corporation employing 47,000 employees worldwide. And they have been supporting the Policy Exchange strand of work around this area. So very much thanks to them for doing that. And finally, we have Chris Yu, Head of Digital Government, the Digital Government Unit at Policy Exchange, who's written the pamphlet that's on your seats today around the big data opportunity, and we'll hear more about that a bit later. And he also previously authored A Right to Data. A couple of housekeeping things before we start. If you could turn off your phones, that would be most welcome. You are being filmed. If you don't want to be filmed, leave. And if there's a fire, please tweet about it. In terms of the agenda for the night, we'll start off with Chris for a kind of policy exchange perspective on this issue. We'll then have James giving us a more private sector perspective, and then there will be a keynote from the Minister. We'll then have Q&As. Unfortunately, the Minister needs to leave again at 7, so we'll be tightly managing around his time. So we'll get in as much with Francis as we can before he leaves. We'll then carry on up to probably about 7:30, but depending on really your levels of enthusiasm, if you all leave when Francis does, we'll take the message. So I think that's everything from me. I'm now going to hand over to Chris to tell us about the policy exchange perspectives on big data. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, good evening and welcome to Policy Exchange, and thanks, Hitan, for chairing this evening. So I'm Chris Yu, head of our Digital Government Unit, and I direct our research here on public policy for a world increasingly dominated by technology, data, and the internet. And I'm just going to say a few words about the report that we published this morning, which shares its title with this evening's event, The Big Data Opportunity, Making Government Faster, Smarter, and More Personal. Now, the modern world generates an absolutely staggering quantity of data. If you count across all forms of storage, from mobile phones to DVDs and hard disks, the world's capacity to store information this year has reached 2.5 zettabytes. And for those of you not used to counting in zettabytes, 1 zettabyte equals 1 trillion gigabytes. If we were to store 2.5 zettabytes on DVDs and pile them up, then the stack of disks would stretch from here, out the window, all of the way to the moon and half the way back again. Now, the business of government is no exception to this explosion in data. Extraordinary quantities of data are amassed in the course of running public services everything from managing welfare payments and running the NHS through to issuing passports and driving licenses. And regardless of the stance the government chooses on openness and transparency, an abundance of data and computing power gives the public sector new ways to organise, learn and innovate. So the purpose of the report we published today is really threefold. First, to inspire policymakers around the opportunity for data and analytics to transform public service delivery. Second, to sound a note of caution about the challenges this agenda poses for the public sector. And third, to start a debate about how we move forward. So on the opportunity first. In our view, the opportunity for public service transformation is real. For citizens, the application of data, technology and analytics has the potential to save time and make interacting with government a much smoother experience. And this runs across the whole spectrum, from pre-populating forms rather than asking for the same information twice, through to personalising welfare to help people access the support they need. And some of this already happens. When you apply for a driving licence online, you need to supply a photograph and a signature. And you know what? If you've got a UK passport, then the DVLA will try to capture this electronically from the information already available. And this is just the start. So, earlier this year, we saw very long delays at the UK border, particularly at Heathrow, with queues breaching official time limits on 107 occasions during the first 15 days of April. To help sort this out, more might be done to analyse the dynamics of airport queues in real time, to anticipate bottlenecks and ensure enough passport desks are open in the right places at the right times. The technology exists to collect and interrogate this data fast. We really ought to be beyond finding out what's going on days or weeks later. On tax, HMRC might collect more unpaid tax by accelerating the use of algorithms to mine data and flag cases for investigation. Now, there's absolutely still a role for seasoned experts in judgment, but people are expensive, and there are only so many cases a human being can look at every day. The better we can get at using machine learning to spot complex avoidance, the more time compliance officers can spend getting cash in the door. Take a third example, the census. The last census was taken in 2011, and it cost us around £500 million. Now, rather than repeat this exercise in 2021, a virtual census, based on linking the electoral roll, the council tax register and other sources, might deliver acceptable quality and be more up to date. Overall, we think the potential for improvements is significant. In the report, we estimate that reaching cutting-edge performance might, in time, save up to £16 billion to £33 billion a year. Now, this is necessarily a broad brush estimate, and it's important not to get too hung up on precisely what the right number is. But we do know that fraud in the public sector costs around £21 billion a year. A further £10 billion is lost to errors, and £7 to £8 billion lost in uncollected debts. And we know the tax gap, the difference between theoretical tax liabilities and what people actually pay, is around £35 billion. So there's clearly potential to make progress. Public sector productivity in the UK has been pretty much flat for a decade. Better use of data and analytics may provide an opportunity to change this and help us meet the fiscal mandate by improving efficiency rather than reducing service levels. On to the challenges. Big data technologies alone are not a silver bullet for transforming the public sector. Underlying data and statistical issues like quality, standards and bias still need to be recognised and addressed. And governments must have the capability to conduct, interpret and consume the outputs of data and analytics work intelligently. The role sometimes described as the data scientist spans a range of disciplines, from computer science and quantitative methods to the ability to tell stories and visualise complex relationships. Now, that is not a traditional role within most organisations. And this is only partly about cutting-edge data science skills. Just as important, if not more so, is ensuring that public sector leaders and staff are literate in the scientific method and confident combining data with judgment. Governments will also need the courage to pursue this agenda with strong ethics and integrity. The same technology that holds so much potential also makes it possible to put intense pressure on civil liberties. Both governments and businesses are exposed to tensions when attempts to extract value from data collide with individuals' wishes not to be tracked, monitored, or singled out. So the report we published this morning puts down two recommendations for a way forward. First, we would like to see an elite data team set up in the Cabinet Office with responsibility for identifying big data opportunities and helping departments to realise them. This should take a lean, agile approach modelled on lessons learned from the nudge team. In its first year, it should look to identify savings and benefits for central government over and above existing plans worth at least £1 billion. It should also have the job of spreading awareness, understanding and demand for data and analysis in the public sector. The best data scientists in the world will be no use if officials and ministers have not had an opportunity to learn how to consume and use big data analysis effectively. And we suggest that a sunset review at the end of year 2 should be the point to judge progress. If successful, data science should be formalised as a professional grouping inside government and sit alongside existing tracks for economists, statisticians, operational and social researchers. Second, we would like to see the government adopt a code for responsible analytics to help it adhere to the highest ethical standards in data use. Important elements of such a code might include 1. Putting outcomes before capabilities. In other words, data and analytics capabilities should always be acquired on the basis of a clear and openly communicated public policy justification, and never for their own sake. Where such capabilities are no longer needed, they should be surrendered. 2. Respect the spirit of the right to privacy. Auxiliary data and analytics should not be used to infer personal or intimate information about citizens. Where this sort of data is needed, consent should be sought explicitly. And 3, failing in the lab, not in real life. We suggest using a sandbox environment and synthetic data to test all major big data initiatives. This will enable initiatives to be subjected to scrutiny and peer review before a decision is made on implementation. And the last of these is particularly important. We all have difficulty drawing a clear line about how far it's acceptable to go with data and analytics work. For the most part, we're best at recognising decisions that overstep the mark when we see them. Far better to do this in a safe environment than to make a mistake that might set the data agenda back significantly. Now, these elements of the code are intended as a starter for debate, and we urge government, parliamentarians, citizens, civil society, the business community and others to debate, challenge and improve on our proposal. So in conclusion, the prize at stake is large. We need to accelerate practical, radical efforts to capture it, whilst being mindful, always, that we do not sacrifice our integrity along the way. I look forward to hearing perspectives from other speakers and to discussing the issues raised. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And let me welcome the Minister who's arrived. And just so you know, Minister, we've introduced you already in your absence, so I won't be doing that again. I'm going to shortly hand over to James, but those of you lurking in the back, I know the wine is at the back, but there are seats at the front, so make your own mind up about the trade-off. You now have the data to choose.
Great. I can see people are more attracted to the wine at the moment. So good evening, everybody. My name is James Petter. I'm the UK and Ireland Managing Director for EMC. And I'm extremely happy to be here to support the findings of today's Policy Exchange report. Firstly, a few words about who we are, why we think it's important, and announce some research we've developed in tandem with the Policy Exchange's work here. I'd like to say thank you to Chris and the team at the Policy Exchange, and also the Minister for supporting this project and the event. For those who don't know EMC, and as I have the microphone, I'm going to tell you about us. We're a $20 billion company delivering the technology that manages, secures, and analyzes the information for the world's biggest companies and public sector organizations. We spend in the region of $12 billion in research and development, and over the last 9 years, we've spent $14.5 billion in acquisitions. In the UK, we have 1,600 employees with 14 offices, and Hetton said we had 47,000 people working for us. We actually have 54,000, so we've hired a lot of people since he last said that. So, we have a strong interest in big data as a company, as well as being a market leader in data storage. And following our Greenplum acquisition in 2009, we've been involved in developing, modeling, and delivering the promise of big data technology. So, what is big data? Before I talk more about the potential of big data for the UK public sector, I'd like to talk you briefly through about how we're already working with firms to make use of big data in the private and public sectors around the world. The first example is with insurance firms, where insurance firms are using big data to analyze sensor data from GPS trackers, delivering better premiums to drivers who drive safely, consistently. The second example is with energy firms, who are using big data analytics with smart metering, improving forecasting and supporting more efficient energy production, delivering savings and carbon reductions. If I then turn to the public sector elsewhere in the world, we're working with revenue services to apply big data analytics to the issue of non-compliance, fraud and error in tax revenue collection. We're also helping officials and politicians in government monitor and respond to issues of societal concern drawn from streaming analysis of social media buzz. We're creating a system that helps improve treatment of patients with rare diseases using insights drawn from genetic, clinical, and other disparate assets, drawing on the non-obvious associations between genes and other factors that emerge from the analysis. There is potential for evolving business models, achieving savings and changing the way governments interact with citizens. So in terms of the UK public sector and big data, how prepared is the UK public sector to make use of big data? Well, we're launching research today that demonstrates where we are. The top priority, alongside cost savings for public sector leaders to deliver growth and innovation, is to make better use of data. Leaders in business and government report that 19% of their IT budgets are allocated to big data projects. 43% plan to deploy big data analytics within the year. But many struggle to define big data analytics. Only 44% could identify it from a list, confusing it with everything from website analytics to the data itself. And there needs to be some education here to bridge this gap and help people make use of the data more effectively. And there needs to be a step change in the way data is used to drive growth in both the public and private sector. So how could big data support UK government? With all these data sets, analysing, aggregating and combining them in new, often unexpected ways is what delivers value. Together with a policy exchange, we discussed possible applications big data could have in the UK public sector, and you can read about these in the report. Government has ambitious targets to achieve, and the 33 billion big data savings could come from a variety of sources. And we wanted to flag some priority areas where big data could help to deliver this goal. A key source of possible savings lies in the way in which we deliver healthcare. And you will all have seen headlines like waiting lists for critical care inhumane, or have read about NHS trusts going into administration. The Department of Health estimates that 75% of its budget goes on chronic care. Using big data to support a stratified healthcare system that uses anonymised patient care data to improve clinical care pathways, meaning get the right treatment to the right patients faster, cutting waiting lists, will drive the move to preventative care, saving billions compared to the current reactive approach. Sensor data, telehealth terminals, prescription data can also be analysed to push people into looking after themselves better or getting preemptive treatment before they need to be readmitted to hospital. Another key issue in our view is fraud. Estimates put the cost of fraud to the UK at between $25 to $30 billion a year. Revenue and Customs is already doing some successful pattern matching analytics to identify and respond to potential fraudsters based on relatively small samples of tax submissions. Now, by moving to a more comprehensive big data model, they could accelerate the process of analysing and identifying fraud patterns beyond sampling and tackle the problem of fraud and error more comprehensively, as we've been doing elsewhere in the world. So what's next? So we fully endorse the Policy Exchange's proposal of a specialist data force within the Cabinet Office. We want to collaborate with UK government to build a world-class capability to transform public sector services and achieve substantial cost savings using big data. And to support this, we will make EMC's Green Plum Analytics workbench which is a unique virtual lab environment that the government can use to accelerate innovation in big data. Essentially, this is an enormous bank of technology that will facilitate the testing of big data projects at scale. This is where Chris was referring to the sandpit. It includes 1,000 hardware nodes and has the physical capacity to store half the written works of mankind from the beginning of recorded history. So it's pretty big. In parallel, we're working with Cranfield University to accelerate the education of business and organizational leadership in taking on a data-driven mindset. And it's not just that we need more data scientists, but we need the leadership of the business and public sectors to change the way that they make use of these data sets. But it's important to say, responsible analytics is crucial. We also support Policy Exchange's recommendation for a code for responsible analytics. The need for this was highlighted in our research, with 70% of leaders in the public and private sectors looking for a code of conduct to support their big data analytic efforts. Big data projects must be managed responsibly, using data with the permissions granted to it by the individuals and organizations that own that data. So by means of a summary, better use of big data has the potential to fuel a change in the way government services are delivered, providing multiple opportunities for savings and innovation. The challenge is to achieve more than incremental change. It is one of transformation, and big data can support and inform transformation on the scale to deliver better outcomes for citizens. The private sector can help with the resource, insight, and platforms needed to help make it all happen, and we're excited to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Now let me invite the Minister Francis Maude to give us a keynote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Policy Exchange and to EMC for providing this report. It's invaluable. It's absolutely timely and lots of very good thoughts and material in it. I want to give you a few reflections from my point of view as the Minister in the coalition government responsible for the government's transparency programme and the open data programme, and we published last week our white paper on open data. Our starting, it seems to me there are several stages in the thinking on this. The first is you've got to have good data of reasonable quality. The second is you need to make it available. And the third is it needs to be able to be used. You have focused, particularly in this report, on how the government should use, the public sector should use data much better, which we have huge sympathy with. We're not very close to being able to do that really well at this stage. But the other part of it is making it available so that others can use it. And we are ahead of anywhere else in the world on that front, which we don't rest on our laurels at all, but we have made some progress. So the first point, actually, about having good data. There's lots of data around. The sort of information that we started to think we wanted when we came into office 2 years ago, we found was rather scarce. Good quality management information was very scarce indeed. We had loads of complaints about its absence. Sir Philip Green came in at my invitation to do a quick study of review of government efficiency, and his views on the quality of government data were unrepeatable in polite society such as this, but expressed trenchantly and vividly in exceedingly colourful language. His conclusion was that because the data we had was inconsistent and not made available, it was impossible for government to buy efficiently, and thus huge amounts of taxpayers' money was being squandered unnecessarily. And these views were expressed, they were echoed rather more politely by the non-executives that we brought into government to serve on departmental boards, headed by Lord Brown. and they have consistently said that the departments they are working in lack good management information. It's getting better, but it's nowhere near right yet. And what we particularly lack is and National Audit Office have said the same thing, Institute for Government, this is a repetitive theme. And what we particularly lack is accurate and comparable data management information across government, consistent so you can compare apples in one department with apples in another, and data series which don't change all the time. So you can compare apples this year with apples last year. Again, that kind of comparability and transparency and visibility is the handmaiden of accountability, which is one of the reasons why it's sometimes resisted. So something was seriously wrong here. It is improving, but we are not there yet. Last year we introduced quarterly data summaries. These are snapshots of how each department is spending its budget, the results it's achieved, and how it's deploying its workforce. I'm ashamed to say that at the beginning of this process, the completeness of the responses in the quarterly data summaries was less than 60%. It's now gone up to 86%. It's still not great, actually, that some parts of government are still unwilling or maybe unable to provide data with common definitions. It's a start, there's progress, we need to go much further. So we want to ensure that government functions like the best run businesses, and we're improving management information. In procurement, it's improved dramatically. In workforce, whereas before the last election, when I used to ask questions, parliamentary questions about the size of the civil service, I used to find the questions were diverted to the Office of National Statistics, as if this was a sort of mildly interesting external phenomenon, which was tracked out of politeness almost. But the idea that this was a crucial piece of management information seemed alien. We now have that information on a proper real-time basis. This is improving. The better our data is, the more accurate and comparable and usable it is, the easier it will be for the public to demand that its accuracy improves. As we get better data, we can ensure government runs more efficiently, saving the taxpayer more. So getting quality data is the first thing. And there's always been a tendency when initially we decided to make public the government's COINS database, the public spending database. There were lots of concerns expressed about this because the quality might not be very good, it wasn't very accessible, to which our reasonably robust response was publish and be damned, to coin the phrase. If it isn't very good quality, then actually publicity soon starts to, and visibility soon starts to improve. It starts to create the pressure to improve the quality. Was it very accessible? No. But did people start to use it and use it effectively? Yes, they did, and have continued to do so. So transparency and open data is central to the government's agenda. We're seeing today governments, societies, economies all over the world opening up. I'm glad that we are, we think, leading the way by general consent, but by no means resting on our laurels. The technology that exists today has meant that for the first time people can access and exploit data in new ways. It's easier for people to demand data, it's easier for governments to provide it, and it's easier for citizens to use data to inform their choices in public services and to demand responses from providers. It's even easier for entrepreneurs and developers to drive innovation and economic and social growth based on the raw material of data, the new kind of feedstock of the 21st century. So far we've released almost 9,000 data sets on our flagship data portal, data.gov.uk, which we relaunched in a much more usable format last week. Include key information on transport, health, education, crime and justice, and of course financial information on government spending. Now everyone can scrutinize local crime statistics, they can look at sentencing rates, school results, and hospital infection rates, and they can demand improvements. This data informs the choices that increasingly in the reform of public services people have. Releasing data is giving also businesses the opportunity to exploit the valuable data that used to be underused. In their big data study, McKinsey said that across Europe, data could be worth a staggering 250 billion euros. The European Commission has put the prize at 140 billion. I'm not arguing about the difference, it's still a lot. I mean, one way or another, there is a lot of value here. The opportunities for enterprise won't always be obvious. For example, some years ago when the US released its public weather service, one surprise result was a boost to the insurance industry. Data helped farmers to protect their profits, leading to dramatic improvements in agricultural productivity. The weather derivatives market today in the US alone is worth $3.5 billion, powered by big data. Last autumn, we announced that we would publish data from all 5,000 weather stations alongside real-time transport information, alongside NHS data to promote life sciences research, alongside house price data and other more valuable data sets. And we will keep looking to put more and more data in the public domain, not randomly, but increasingly responding to demand from those who see the opportunity to use and exploit data. At the beginning of the Obama administration, in a flurry of activity, huge amounts of data was disclosed, and then gradually there was a sense that while there was a large volume, it wasn't necessarily the data that people actually wanted. We want to focus on providing the data that people really want to use, which is the high value activity, the high value areas. And next month we'll be publishing new data on how well GP practices do in saving the lives of patients with cancer, crucial data about early diagnosis. And this data will allow patients to see the survival rates flowing from every practice and will inform choices. We're also encouraging businesses and voluntary groups and charities to be open and transparent. Care home owners, for example, are to publish outcomes data. This is voluntary, it's on their own initiative, but it's powerful and it's happening. We've reached a pivotal moment where we consider the rules and ways of working in a data-rich world, how we can use this resource effectively, creatively, and responsibly. The Policy Exchange report today, published today, is very timely, as I say, and it makes valuable recommendations. We'll be looking at it closely. It follows closely on the back of our open data white paper, published on Thursday last week, which sets out how we'll make it easier to access data. Of course, data isn't new. It's easier to access today and to exploit, as has been said. What's new is how it can be aggregated and patterns made and connections made that can drive choice, efficiency, and innovation. This ideally will lead to a spread of knowledge that it can empower citizens, not just here but across the globe. There's a danger that we could be left unequal access to data, where only a select few have access to big data and the expertise to analyze it. We need to ensure that the data revolution benefits everyone, not just the entrepreneurs. That's why we believe that data, whether it's big or small, has the most value when people can use it effectively. And that's why I announced last week that the whole of government is adopting the public data principles, which set out that our open data must be published in machine-readable form under the same open license which enables free reuse, including commercial reuse. We're also adopting, as a Tim Berners-Lee's 5-star scheme for assessing the degree to which open data sets are reusable to improve the consistency of the data landscape. And because all of our data has to be easy to find, easy to use, and in one place, we launched last week a completely overhauled portal, the data.gov.uk site. Better search facilities, simpler ways to access information, and advanced GIS data search, and better tools for developers. As we reinforce the presumption to publish in the public sector, we're not losing sight of the fact that we have to be vigilant about retaining trust in data. And I welcome the emphasis on this in the Policy Exchange report. We're determined to strengthen the protection of privacy, something that many responses to our consultation agreed with. The white paper enshrines our commitment to ensuring that privacy isn't an afterthought, that it's at the beginning of all discussions concerning the release of new data. I've recently announced the appointment of a privacy expert to the Transparency Board, which I chair, to make sure we bring in the latest expertise on privacy measures. I'm acutely aware that in this hugely important and powerful open data movement, one step that goes wrong, one set of anonymized data that allows personal data to be revealed can set the whole process back. We need to be really careful. But at the same time, not allow concerns about privacy to be a pretext and an alibi and an excuse for not releasing data. It's really important that we get this right. We need to ensure that we keep pace with the latest technology so that anonymized data sets remain anonymized and personal data remains personal. This is so important because the greater openness of data sets and the success of the information marketplace hinges on our ability to safeguard data from fraud and misuse. We're determined to see all of our public services being provided digitally by default. Where they can be delivered online, they should be delivered online and only online. And the sharing of data is a key enabler of this. All this means that users of digital public services must be able to assert their identities safely, securely, and simply. We've allocated money to our identity assurance program, which will see the private sector take a lead role in producing identity solutions for public services and indeed for the whole market. The government will set standards and encourage the development of a market for them. We're absolutely not looking for a single solution for identity assurance. Technology moves far too quickly for that, and there certainly won't be anything that remotely resembles a central database. Instead, we're creating a decentralized structure in which people can choose themselves their own identity providers. This system does not store data, and it puts the user in control of how it's used. We said privacy must be protected, and we need to, but at the same time, we need to get smarter about using our data assets. In particular, we need to overhaul the public sector's outdated approaches to using data. Right now, there are too many cultural and legal barriers that leave public sector workers, from the police to job centre advisors to those in the NHS, all working in isolation on the same problems. Data sharing is perceived to be too difficult, even when it's plainly in the public interest. That's particularly relevant to our approach to tackling fraud, error, and uncollected debt, a key area that Policy Exchange, that this study has identified. Public sector loses an estimated £37 billion a year across the public sector through debt, fraud, and error, in large part because of our failure to share data effectively. Efforts to share information on known fraud and fraudsters has been consistently undermined by the complexity and general confusion over seemingly contradictory legal constraints. We're working with the National Fraud Authority to rationalize the 86 legal gateways that currently exist for data sharing between the 8 major debt departments and local councils. This will facilitate better sharing of information and enable us to make significant advances. We want to create a single legislative framework that allows the sharing of data on debtors. So this is important area to move forward. So we need to be the best steward of the data we hold, matching the best in the private sector. You make the point rightly that data technologies aren't a silver bullet. To address fully the issues like data standards and quality, we need skilled people who can conduct and interpret data and analytics and work intelligently on this. We have a great team at the moment, but this is an area for growth, and we need to drive it further. Whitehall has traditionally focused on policy, not on running like a business, so that data that you could reliably and objectively compare over time and across departments has not been a priority. It's going to change. As I said earlier, we are committed now to creating consistent, comparable data and we will take this further and take it rapidly. We'll be taking forward the recommendations of Dr. Martin Reed, the former CEO of Logica, who's led a review of the information we published through the quarterly data summaries. So there's a long way to go before the government and the wider public sector fully harnesses the potential of our data assets. We're not trying to claim by any means that the government has all the answers. The internet flourished precisely because it was shaped by its users, not by governments, and the same approach should apply here. We want users to drive the release of data. The new world of open data needs buy-in from everyone. Transparency can be risky. It's uncomfortable for governments. It takes us out of our comfort zone, which is why politicians in oppositions love it and enthuse about it. They stick with it for the first 12 months when all they're doing is releasing their predecessors' data, and then tend to roll it back. We've stuck with it, and we've taken it further, and we're going to take it further yet. But don't have any illusion about this. This is well out of the comfort zone for politicians and for those in government. But it is the way of the future. These are the first formative years of the new age of open government. There are lots of challenges, but they have to be overcome. We will keep building towards an effective, personalized 21st century democracy, with transparency informing better choice over more modern and effective public services and open data as the key driver of innovation and growth. The future is open, and I'm glad to say that Britain's leading the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And you'll have seen I've been tight with our speakers on time, because I know that there will be questions for Francis, who has to leave at 7 o'clock. So what I'd like to do is take questions in batches of 3 to speed the process up. And if you could prioritise yourself, if you've got questions which are particularly aimed at the Minister, we can deal with the other 2 after Francis has gone. Please stick to the topic, please be brief, and do identify yourselves or your affiliation. So, and I think there's a mic, so if you could just wait for the mic.
Yeah. Andrew Scott, formerly of the Cabinet Office, and formerly, as I'll explain, of DWP. I found that, I mean, thanks to all 3 speakers, I found the paper an interesting and useful one. And I think, as the speakers have brought out, it isn't just about big data. It's actually about the use of data in government. Francis talked about management information. To me, it's also about being data-driven at the case level. That Chris talked about the Heathrow effect. And yes, data can give you more about the flow of passengers. But actually, for other reasons, the government collects advanced passenger information, so it knows who is on every plane. And then they will get mixed up at Heathrow to keep the border agency employed. And collecting this data and then driving individual decisions by it is a big step for the civil service, but one that's got to be taken. And I know from my DWP experience that a social security claim from someone who's previously been convicted of fraud is treated as no different on the basis of the record. Relevant. This is a fresh claim that must be looked at as merit. It would be unfair to do otherwise. I would suggest actually it would be fair to the company to take all that into account, and that allows for streamlining the economy in the processing of the normal cases. Now that does raise issues about the responsible analytics, and I'd like to see that touched upon. But I think we need to balance that sort of individual interest against the public interest. And in cases, I think it's known that children at risk can be predicted almost perfectly from data about their parents before the child is born. And question then, when is it right to do those interventions? And final point for me, I'm very glad to see the operational researchers recognised as at last for poor relations of economists and statisticians. Operational research started in Coastal Command during the war, which was the austerity end of the age of austerity. Service
Could you wind it up?
Yeah, a service
No, really.
starved of resources, where actually they brought data and bright people together to think how to use those resources in the most effective way.
Thank you. Lady next to you.
Thanks. I'm Hadley Beeman from Technology Strategy Board. I'm wondering if you could talk briefly about the implementation challenges to get from here to this great vision that we're adopting. You talked about the regulatory challenges, and that's fantastic. What about the technical challenges? Standardizing data formats and being able to, on a functional level, share and exchange the kind of data that we're talking about may take a significant amount of work. Are we ready? And if not, what do we need to do to get there?
And gentleman just behind you.
Thank you. John Lahal, Inside Public Affairs. We're working with a small patient charity, and they're interested in atrial fibrillation, the Atrial Fibrillation Association. We've done a job in aggregating data from GP practices, the NHS Act as a variation, hospital admissions, so on and so forth, and really pulled together a quite compelling profile for local health economy, so you can actually pinpoint those where you can go in and say, your cost of stroke is twice as much as a neighbouring PCT, and we are prepared to work with you to put in place the best practice. So I guess that's me saying that we are making a reality of this vision and welcome that. But we feel that the other side of the same coin is perhaps having that more qualitative data, and that's why the role of the Freedom of Information Act is invaluable for those organisations in terms of scrutiny, audit, and holding the public sector to account in terms of action. So do you have any thoughts around that and how you see that being sustained? Because we want to avoid any hurdles being put in the face of the FOI Act.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's take those three. We've got use of data in individual cases, implementation challenges around the technical side, and then freedom of information and the future around that. So can I ask you, Minister, to respond first?
Well, just on that last point about freedom of information, I mean, I would like to make the Freedom of Information Act redundant because we push out proactively so much data and evidence that people don't need to ask for it. And given that we will always want to protect and rigorously protect the space in which policy advice is given and discussion takes place, that we should be much more open about the data and the evidence on which decisions are based, and the data sets are a crucial part of that. And actually, we're not nearly open enough, haven't been typically about that. That's beginning now to change. The question about the technical challenges, actually, other people in the room much better qualified than I am to, probably you yourself, I think, and better qualified to answer that than I am. I mean, I'm one of the things we did very early on, within literally a couple of weeks of the coalition government being formed, was to set up the Transparency Board, which is full of formidable experts. This is when Andrew was head of director of transparency in the Cabinet Office. It includes Nigel Shadbolt, who's here, Tim Berners-Lee, other people who give me hold my feet to the fire. I encourage them to also to hold other people's feet to the fire, which they do very vigorously, and who deserve between them a huge amount of the credit for the progress that we've made. And you know, we drew out the Open Government License, which is crucial, which very much done with the assistance of the Transparency Board, which has become kind of like a worldwide standard for open data. So yeah, a long way to go. In terms of technology, we don't have at the moment common platforms across government for data. We are moving towards that, but it will take time. When I was in Estonia recently, which is kind of world leader in e-government, we asked them how they made so much progress. They said we started with 2 in the 1990s when Estonia became an independent country. We started with 2 enormous advantages. We had no legacy, and we had no money. So we've achieved the second of those. But we still have quite a lot of legacy. thing that excites me actually is that the technology now exists, and this is, you all know much better than me, a development for the last very, very few years. The technology now exists to make the burden of the legacy less important, because we can replace, we can create platforms and the ability to use data and exploit data and create new platforms and new infrastructure at a fraction of the cost. So the burden of the legacy becomes less troublesome than it would otherwise be.
I'm going to be mean to our other two speakers and take another set of questions because Francis has got limited time. So
I've got to go now.
Really? Can we have just a couple of quick comments that you could at least hear? One there and one there from...
Thank you. Simon Burrell from Involve and ScienceWise. You talked about the need to get buy-in around a number of these things, identity and all sorts of privacy issues and so on. Research Council's UK and ScienceWise recently ran a public dialogue, and a number of things that you said were repeated by the public. And I guess my question is, how are you intending to go about getting public buy-in to the sorts of things that you're talking about, particularly around identity, privacy and those sorts of issues, but also the sorts of much bigger data issues around stratified medicine, which really raise all sorts of public concerns, I suspect.
Yeah, lady in the line, Jack.
Trudy at the World Town Planning Institute. Earlier this year we did a piece of work on transparency and spatial data, i.e. maps. And it took Manchester University to extract 100 maps we found on data, but they don't talk to each other. It was impossible to overlay one on the other. And actually we came to very similar conclusions of this report in relation to map-based data. So I'd encourage you, Minister, to ensure that we look at data in all its formats, and in particular, map-based spatial data can be really powerful.
Okay, shall I just respond quickly to those? I mean, on that point, I hear that. We'll definitely look at that. I mean, I think we hope we've got getting beyond the point where public authorities that reluctantly release data then convert it. So in some cases, do things to the data to stop people reusing it. I mean, there was one local authority that was reluctantly releasing parking data and then painstakingly converting machine-readable data into PDFs that couldn't be machine-read. You kind of wonder what's going on there. So I hear that. Your point about how do you get the buy-in? Well, we need to be very open about how we do this. And I think the team that have been working on identity assurance in the Cabinet Office, which Bill McCluggage here led until he left the public service. And there was a very strong sense that we need to show that what we're doing is not, emphatically not, another go at creating an identity database, and showing that it is federated, decentralized, it's about the use of different databases. And then when you get into the sort of the big scary world of data sharing, I'm now comfortable that the technology exists now that enables data sets to be matched for analytical purposes momentarily without creating merged aggregated databases. I'm comfortable that that's the case. No one seriously challenged that, but there will still be, for a time, a fear that anything you do along these paths creates the huge centralized database. And so we need to proceed carefully with this, and we need to get the kind of organizations that are rightly very vigilant about this. I mean, absolutely, I don't quarrel with the desire to really probe and interrogate and challenge this. I think it's absolutely right. I'm comfortable we can do things better without running the risks that definitely did exist previously. But we need to do this kind of, it's small steps, show, tell, be open to examination, engage, and then I think we can make some progress. And we need to, because there are massive, massive prizes, and a huge opportunity cost if we don't. With that, I think I'm going to have to love you and leave you. Got to go over the road and vote.
Thank you very much. Can we just shout out, please? So first of all, I'd just like to bring our other speakers back in to see if they want to respond to any of the challenges they've thrown up so far.
So I'll pick up the technical question from David. So from a technology perspective, it is absolutely possible to compare data sets. The Minister makes a very good point here that legacy is the biggest hindrance to making progress. And the only way to get beyond the legacy question is to ensure that you have the right governance and the right culture within public sector and private sector in order to do that. Without those two elements, it's very difficult to be able to make those changes. Hence why in my speech I was talking around transformation, and transformation only comes when you have the governance and the culture aligned to address the legacy and then move forward and use that data more effectively. So that would be my comment.
Okay, and I was just going to return to Andrew's point around use of data in government. I mean, this goes to this age-old question about is policy making an art or a science? And it feels to me like we are now in this place where there is data available, there should be data management information available. Policy should be much closer to the science, and we should be treating it that way. We should be running hypothesis-based testing. We should be auditing after policy has been in place and learning on a systemic basis.
Can I take another batch of questions? I've got you here and then you here, and then somebody at the back there.
Hi, good evening. John Algar from Bright Blue. Now, there's been a strong focus, obviously, on the domestic opportunities for big data. You mentioned Estonia. What other conversations are going on at a transnational level for sharing best practices for big data implementation? And also, do you see in the future any opportunities for transnational sharing of big data sets? I guess particularly for tackling problems like terrorism.
Jerry Gavin, Open Source Consortium. If I may, Jerry Gavin, Open Source Consortium, if I may, I'd just put some data together and then ask the question. James Petter, great name for big data, by the way. Did you invent that? But you talk about your software and the amazing things that you can find out. The Minister, I say this question to you, so on to no point. The Minister's talking about, to protect privacy. Then my colleague Andrew Stock talks about, once guilty, always guilty, because we'll have the data on you. Some extra data. Officials, Terry Leakey, Bob Diamond, in the public and private sector, when things go wrong, they suffer pain. When the discs in this report we mentioned were lost, the permanent secretary sneaked off the Cabinet Office into a special project it was time for him to retire. No, not much pain there. So the question is, given the excitement of your software, given the Church of Good News, don't worry, the privacy is going to be okay, what I want to know is, does anybody really know how this is going to pan out? And once the, you talk about governance, but until senior officials in the public sector take pain for screwing up, is any of this going to convince the public this isn't more declining quality?
We've got one more at the back there.
Thanks. Hi, my name's James Herbert. I work for a company called Methods, but I was at the Cabinet Office before and at the Royal Borough of London remained head after that. So kind of being quite in the vein of open data, etc. So I just established my credentials before I say what I'm about to say. So I'm a big fan and supporter of it, but it's the word or the expression apples and apples was used earlier. And what that strikes me, back to your point maybe, James, is apples and apples isn't really about data or technology, it's about processes. And so it's great to say that the cost of one stroke case is more than this one, but actually, until you know how it's measured and the different criteria by which it's measured, actually it could be quite misleading data. So I'm kind of thinking, where does government back this up in terms of business architecture as opposed to just data driving stuff and technology driving stuff? Because although I'm kind of from a technological background, it's always a mistake and that drives everything. And the second point was just about the Cabinet Office, which I have to hold my hands up because I was there, which I think having a team there that leads on data is a really good idea, as long as it gets out of Whitehall and gets out into the organisations that actually need some practical help in delivering this stuff, because I can tell some personal stories around things that have just been released as new now that I did 3 years ago. And actually, it doesn't keep up with the more arm's length public sector bodies out there. So I think it's great to have that team in there, but they need to be practical and they need to be out there actually giving the public sector organisations practical support and advice, not sat in the white wall just coming up with strategies.
I'd love to do a straw poll of who in the audience hasn't worked at the Cabinet Office. we won't go there for now. So the 3 questions are something around kind of how will this privacy issue pan out given that the software is becoming more and more powerful? Are there transnational dimensions both in terms of conversations and potentially sharing? And then what about the kind of process side of all of this? Will the Cabinet Office actually get off their asses and get out to beyond Whitehall?
James? So in terms of the transnational sharing of how big data sets can be used, in EMC's experience, yes, we are within our own company cross-referencing where big data sets have been used before. So the answer to that would be yes. I obviously can't tell you exactly which clients those are. The question around privacy is a very, very poignant one, because obviously with all the press that's been going on, it's come front and centre. Now, in terms of privacy, I can't comment on the policy that the government is putting out there in terms of, what is the policy around privacy. We have a certain amount of personal responsibility around privacy, obviously with things like Facebook, what information you want to put on there. But really the fundamental point here is we are now working in an environment where it is so complex in any given organisation or government, that how can we understand exactly where that data is, or what is that piece of data where privacy could be broken, for in some of the examples we've seen, and how do I secure myself from preventing that from getting into the public domain and thereby losing my job? Now, that question, that is an enormously long answer that you could get to that particular statement. The only way that we would suggest is it kind of always comes on to the subsequent question. You need to have a robust policy around how you manage your data, and you need to have a robust view in terms of what data you're prepared to allow to be used by external organisations, your suppliers or your customers, versus what data you're prepared for your internal people to have. So it's a multifaceted question. There is no distinct answer, but it is, again, it comes back to the governance and the policy around how you manage that data.
Just to follow up on that, excuse me, just to follow up on that, I mean, there is this idea of the jigsaw effect, as it were. How many pieces of data would you need to pull together who it is, and how many,
So how many pieces of data to identify a given person?
Use case citizen, for example.
I would be guessing, generally speaking, I mean, I saw an example at my children's school. So the headmaster stands up and he has an iPad and he says, okay, within this room I can see 14 mobiles, I can see this amount of IP addresses, and I know exactly who you are. So whether we like it or not, we are all providing data to other external, internal organisations, and it's down to us as individuals and corporations to be able to define what we're prepared to release. And it's a multifaceted question.
I can see this is one that people want to hit back up on, but let's just get Chris to come in, we'll come back.
So, Karen, your point about accountability, absolutely.
Pain. Accountability. Pain.
Accountability and pain. So I would agree. I would say tighten both of those, but I think it's also about let's make sure we've got enough capability in the public sector to understand what we're dealing with. So, let's understand that there shouldn't be disks in the post that aren't encrypted. There shouldn't be disks in the post, probably. And one of the things that we talk about in the report is why don't we try harder at sandboxing and using synthetic data. So let's test this stuff in something that looks like a lab. Let's see how far we're going to go, and then let's have a conversation about what we've done. Let's peer review the processes, and then if it's good enough and we're comfortable, then we do it. We don't try it out in real life. And just on the point about the team in the Cabinet Office and getting them out there, I mean, absolutely. So one of the things that we mentioned is let's make sure when that team's set up that it has expertise brought in from outside, and let's make sure they've got a very strong mandate, not just to sit in one horse guards, but to get out there into the departments where the data is, and get into the data room and find out what's going on,
and do that with the departments and help them on the journey.
I wouldn't start with departments. I'd start with places where stuff happens, like local authorities.
Good. Next round of questions. I've got one there and one next to you, so and then one here.
Hi, my name is Renata. I work for the writer label David Davis. I'm slightly alarmed by what you just said in relation to something you said earlier. You just said that it's down to us as individuals to define what information we give. However, you talked a lot earlier about nudge. To nudge us will be us giving you the information that you want, not that we want to give. I'd like to know what your thoughts are on whether this is going to be an opt-in or an opt-out. If it's a case of opting out of the option, of whatever data you're wishing us to provide, and you're going to nudge us to give data, I don't really see how my privacy or the privacy of anybody in this room is being taken into consideration.
Thank you. Person next to you.
Thank you. On a related theme, coming back to...
Can you introduce yourself?
So I'm Patrick King from Objective Corporation. I was slightly alarmed too by comments made by one or two people. It's not about how much data you collect or how many pieces of data you collect. It's about how you put them together, who you are when you're putting them together, and for what purpose you're putting it together for. That's where the problem lies, that the data already out there, we can get hold of it. But what matters is there have been some sensible policies. France did actually touch on this, but I think it needs a lot more thoughts, and to just make these comments about, oh, it's all about, you know, you're not going to give away data that you don't want to. That's not the point. I think it needs more consideration.
Gentleman over here.
Nelson Riddle.
If you could just wait for the mic so everybody can hear you.
Nelson Riddle, we work with emerging technology companies, but my interest from some of the comments, James, that you had mentioned, and I'm sorry I can't see you now, but hello again. You had mentioned that in some other countries you've had some successes in these kinds of engagements. Could you highlight one or two of them that might enlighten us as to the applications of what we're talking about? Because so far a lot of this has been kind of on a macro level and policy and philosophical. Anyway, thank you.
Well, Chris, do you want to come to first of all? I mean, it's privacy and privacy is the sort of question.
Privacy and privacy. So privacy is incredibly important. One of the things that we talk about in the report is around this jigsaw effect, auxiliary data. And just because it's theoretically possible to assemble facts and figures in order to tell, to find out things about an individual, doesn't mean that one should. And I guess we would like to see the government be crystal clear that actually it won't attempt jigsaw identification in order to find out things, even if they could be useful. If you're not prepared to have the conversation about why you would do it and justify it, then it shouldn't happen, even behind closed doors. Now that's a hard thing it's a hard ask, but I think it's important, and we've seen cases in the private sector where companies have brought data together to infer things about individuals because it turns out to be quite useful for marketing purposes and so on. That's driven by the profit motive, and I can kind of understand that, but there's the pain of loss of sales and so on when you're found out, and it turns out customers don't like it. It gets back a bit to the point around pain in the public sector. Who is going to carry the can if you overstep the mark? Hence the kind of ought to be very, very clear about this.
James, privacy, and where
let me just be clear. In terms of privacy, obviously the government will dictate what data, initially in terms of they would want us as citizens to, provide, or organisations to provide. Now, I am not advocating the fact that we should be going in and looking at data that people do not want us to have a look at. I'm advocating a responsible attitude to managing data, and as Chris has said in the report, using a sandbox to analyse that data, within the privacy guidelines that the government give us, and not breaking any sort of privacy rules that individuals would not want us having them access to that particular data. So I'm not advocating the fact that privacy is front and centre, as I said in my speech.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm slightly alarmed by government determining privacy. Government's history on privacy is pretty poor. I'd like to know what you think about what you're implementing, what you're going to implement for governments, departments about privacy. What do you think?
So in terms of, I will speak for EMC in terms of what we think. We think that, you should not be breaking privacy rules. So if there is data that a person does not want to be made published, you should not use that data. That's kind of...
But according to what you just said, if government determined that that data is required, then you would follow that. It would be about what government wants rather than what the public wants.
So EMC's view is that we want to adhere to the government's policy around privacy, and we want to ensure that as a corporation we are responsible with the way that we manage and use data. Okay? And so Nelson, yes. Yes. So in terms, so I used an example around with insurance companies.
Yes.
So essentially, where you have 18-year-olds who are paying very high premiums on insurance to insurance firms, up to £2,000 a year, for example. You know, that's pretty unaffordable for an 18-year-old. So what we're doing is some trials using GPS tracking. It's effectively telemetry in a car to see how that driver drives during a given day, a given week, and then assessing the premium based on how consistent or how erratic they are driving that given vehicle. So it's essentially putting telemetry into a car and making sure they pay the relative premium based on their performance at that given time.
Is that something you're doing here or in the United States?
So we're doing some of that in the UK. So you know, it's been running for a few weeks.
So drive home carefully. I will take another batch, but I'm going to abuse my chair's position and ask a question myself. It's a shame Francis is gone, but he mentioned releasing GP data around cancer survival rates or something along those lines. And from a statistical perspective, actually, you're looking at very small data sets. How many patients are passing through this? How much noise is there, and how much is actually going to genuinely tell you genuine information about the performance of GPs. So again, statistical issues are actually very important in putting the data out there. How is it interpreted, and where is the public benefit in how it's used? And that raises a wider question about what is the capacity, both amongst the population at large in terms of understanding how to use this data, and also within the civil service in actually using this data to get it out there. So that will be a perspective I'll be interested in your views on. But let's take a couple of other questions if there are any.
I've got a question for you actually, as a statistician. What do you think of the term data scientist? Not just a statistician.
Right, well, I'll come back to that. No, well, let's take, are there any other questions or comments anyone wants to make? Oh, sorry, I can't actually see you.
That's okay. I'm wearing three hats. My name's Stuart Room. I'm a partner at Filbridge and Waterhouse. So I get instructed by government and by corporates to advise on privacy issues. That's my practice. I'm also a director of the Cyber Security Challenge, which is about trying to fill the skills gap in the economy. And there's a skills gap thing here. And the third one is I'm the president of the National Association of Data Protection Officers, that represents the people who manage this data. So this is really my point about the transformation idea. Just for instance, we've had lots of these projects before actually, but there's a sense of repackaging, but that's not a criticism. But if you look at some data handling problems that have been exposed recently, say for instance the data handling review that took place after the loss of the HMRC data disks, those drives were lost, or the loss was revealed to the public in November 2007, so quite a few years have passed. And what you discover on the ground is the supposed transformation that was meant to occur in data handling after that massive shock hasn't really occurred, actually. So what my concern is that the size of the investment that is required to achieve the transformational cultural change on the ground is so vast that it could actually threaten the birth of these projects at the very beginning. And I think that there has to be some real focus on actually how big a difficulty it is in the public sector to achieve appropriate management of information. So that's my observation. I think it's a big one.
Thank you very much. So let me just quickly respond to the question about data scientists. And I mean, from my perspective, data scientist has become quite a fashionable term at the moment for a new job, which seems to be part statistics, part IT, part management. I think there's a live debate within the world of statisticians as to whether this is anything new or not. From my perspective, it perhaps points the way towards what some of the statisticians in the future will be doing. And so it probably isn't that new or that exciting, but if you can command a premium for it, why don't you? Turning to our speakers, so we've got the question that I posed about, essentially about capability, both in the public at large and in the civil service, and then relatedly really the question of actually is the size of the investment to create that culture changing capability something that we can afford to do. James?
So I would kind of couple the two together. So in terms of capability, it's my belief that within the public sector there is a certain amount of education that's needed in order to drive out that capability in terms of how they manage the data. And the points you make around the fact it's such a big issue, the fact they've got all this data, what do I do with it? Should I even start? I think that is one of the biggest hindrances we see in the private and public sector, where people, it's the do nothing factor. So unless you're prepared to have someone who is going to step out of their comfort zone and drive this program, which I'd like to think that the Minister, that's what he's trying to do, unless you have someone like that who is a sponsor of it, frankly, it doesn't happen. But where you do have that sponsor and you have the governance behind it, it tends to work effectively, although it is over a long-term period.
Okay, so it is all about capability, and it's about, for me, what is the bundle of skills and aptitudes required in modern civil service. And we have, there's a government economic service, there's a government stats service, there's operational researchers, so some of this is out there. But more broadly, we're operating in an environment where data has exploded, computing power has exploded, and a lot of advice for ministers still happens in the form of, let me write a 10-page Word document and maybe stick a table of numbers on the end. And it's not always like that, but sometimes it is. And until we grapple with modernising the civil service, putting those kind of skills in for everyone, then I think we will struggle to make progress. But the Minister reported on civil service reform recently. Some of these moves are underway, so I think we should support that.
I mean, in a sense, this question being posed is, do you think it's realistic? You're on camera.
Yeah, it depends about the pace of change. So in time, people will have grown up with technology, and these kind of skills will end up in the public sector. How fast can you get there? Well, I think it depends, as you say, on how much ministerial effort I'm prepared to put behind this, and it depends on how willing are leaders in the public sector to lead the change. And one of the things we talk about with the data analytics team that we propose is that they not only grapple with the questions about where are the savings, but they need to get to the permanent secretaries and the directors and departments and make them understand, if they don't already understand, why this agenda matters.
Thank you. So I think I want to start wrapping things up now. I'm going to ask both of our speakers just for any kind of final observations or thoughts that they have, and then you can get to the why and if there's any there. James.
So firstly, thank you all. You've been an engaged audience. You've asked some interesting questions for us as well, so thank you. From an EMC's perspective, we do recognise the fact that we are working in an environment where there is so much complexity and so much data out there. So it's really our role to try and simplify how one manages that data, and not only simplify it but also secure it. And once you've simplified and secured it, you can then look to do something with it, analyse, correlate, aggregate it, and get true meaning from it. So there are certain steps to doing this. And without some of the recommendations from the report, such as this cross-government group to look at how they can use data and achieve cost savings, it's certainly my belief that we won't move as far forward as we would want to. So certainly, I think Chris has done a great job in terms of writing this particular report, with our sponsorship. But I think there are certain steps that need to be taken in order to truly accelerate this.
Okay, and my thanks as well for a terrific discussion and some really good, challenging questions. My kind of final take on all of this, the prize is really big. There are significant challenges for the government to overcome, but in our view they should take those head on. And as I was saying when I was talking earlier, this is about the beginning of the conversation, so I encourage anyone who wants to participate to follow up with me, get in touch, and we will take all of this forward.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's been an interesting discussion. In some ways, it feels to me as if we've taken as read the potential benefits of open and big data. We banked those, and we're starting to say, well, how do we get there? Here are some of the roadblocks and issues, and I think that's a valuable conversation. It does feel to me, I have actually read the white paper on open data, and it is a sensitive policy document in terms of actually not just being mechanistic and saying this is going to work, but there is a sense of a conversation about it. So I hope that you will be participating in that conversation and shaping it. And let's hope the government is true to its word in engaging in that way. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming on a wet Tuesday afternoon evening to a discussion about open data. And will you join with me for a final vote of thanks to our speakers?
Sorry.